The morning sun cast long shadows across Rizal Park as Manny Pacquiao made his way along the familiar pathways of Manila's most beloved green space. At 55, the boxing legend still maintained his disciplined routine of early morning walks, though these days they served more for reflection than physical conditioning. The park buzzed with its usual energy, joggers weaving between elderly Tai Chi practitioners, vendors setting up their stalls, and children chasing pigeons near the fountains. Manny pulled his baseball cap lower over his eyes, hoping to avoid recognition for just a little while longer. These quiet moments had become precious to him, especially after decades of living under the constant glare of public attention. The cool morning air filled his lungs as he walked past the monument to José Rizal, the national hero whose bronze figure stood eternally gazing toward the bay. As he rounded a corner near the children's playground, Manny noticed an elderly man sitting alone on a weathered wooden bench. The stranger appeared to be in his 70s, with silver hair and deeply lined hands that spoke of a lifetime of hard work. He wore a faded polo shirt and simple slacks, his posture slightly hunched but his eyes alert and focused. Something about the man's presence made Manny slow his pace, though he couldn't immediately place why. The elderly gentleman looked up as Manny approached, and their eyes met for a brief moment. Recognition flickered across the old man's weathered face, followed by something deeper, a mixture of pride, nostalgia, and unmistakable affection. He studied Manny's features carefully, as if comparing the global icon before him with a memory from long ago. Manny felt an odd stirring in his chest, a sensation he couldn't quite identify. The man's face seemed familiar, yet distant, like a half-remembered dream from childhood. There was something in those kind eyes that transported him back to a different time, when he was just a skinny kid from General Santos City with nothing but raw talent and an unshakable determination to escape poverty. The old man's lips curved into a gentle smile, and he gestured toward the empty space beside him on the bench. His movements were slow and deliberate, carrying the dignity that comes with age and experience. Manny found himself drawn forward, his usual caution around strangers somehow absent in this moment. As Manny settled onto the bench, the morning sounds of the park seemed to fade into the background. The elderly man turned slightly to face him, his expression growing more tender with each passing second. There was no excitement or starstruck behavior that Manny had grown accustomed to from fans. Instead, there was something much more personal and profound. The stranger's eyes glistened with unshed tears as he took in Manny's presence. His weathered hands trembled slightly, not from age or infirmity, but from the weight of emotion that seemed to be building within him. The silence between them stretched comfortably, filled with an unspoken understanding that something significant was about to unfold. Manny studied the man's profile, searching his memory for any clue about their connection. The shape of his nose, the way he held his shoulders, even the particular way he clasped his hands together, all of it felt achingly familiar, yet frustratingly elusive. It was like trying to grasp smoke, the memory dancing just beyond his reach. The old man cleared his throat softly, his voice carrying the rasp of someone who had lived through countless stories. When he finally spoke, his words would shatter the peaceful morning silence and send Manny tumbling back through the decades to a time when dreams seemed impossible and hope was all he had to sustain him. The weight of recognition was building in Manny's chest like a gathering storm, and he sensed that whatever this man was about to reveal would change everything about this ordinary morning walk. The park continued its gentle rhythm around them, but for these two men sitting on a simple wooden bench, time seemed to slow to a crawl as the past prepared to collide with the present. The old man's words hung in the air between them like a bridge spanning decades. Manny felt his breath catch in his throat as the simple statement unlocked a flood of memories that had been buried beneath years of fame, fortune, and global recognition. His hands, which had delivered countless knockout punches, began to tremble as the pieces of a long-forgotten puzzle started falling into place. The elderly stranger's face transformed before Manny's eyes, the wrinkles and age spots seeming to fade as his mind superimposed the image of a younger man, lean, determined, with calloused hands, and an unwavering belief in a scrawny kid who had nothing but heart. The realization hit Manny like a physical blow, stealing the air from his lungs and causing his vision to blur with the sudden onset of tears. This was Teodoro, his first real trainer from the dusty streets of General Santos City, the man who had seen potential in a malnourished 12-year-old who showed up at the makeshift gym with bare feet and borrowed gloves that were 3 sizes too big. The same man who had spent countless hours teaching him the fundamentals of boxing when no one else believed a street kid could amount to anything. Manny's mind raced back to those early days, when training meant hitting a heavy bag made from old rice sacks filled with sand, when protective gear was a luxury they couldn't afford, and when meals were often skipped so he could afford the bus fare to the gym. Teodoro had been more than a trainer then. He had been a father figure, a mentor, and sometimes the only person who believed in Manny's impossible dream. The memories came flooding back with startling clarity, Teodoro's patient voice explaining footwork on the cracked concrete floor of the gym, his weathered hands adjusting Manny's stance, teaching him to keep his guard up, showing him how to throw combinations that would one day make him famous around the world. The way Teodoro would stay late after everyone else had gone home, working with Manny under the dim light of a single bulb, refusing to give up on the kid who reminded him of his own younger self. Manny remembered the day he had left General Santos City for Manila, chasing bigger opportunities and better trainers. He had been so focused on his future that he had barely looked back, consumed by the hunger for success that drove him to train harder, fight more frequently, and climb the ranks of professional boxing. In his relentless pursuit of greatness, he had lost touch with the people who had helped him take his first steps toward that greatness. The guilt hit him like a sledgehammer. Here was the man who had laid the foundation for everything Manny had become, sitting alone on a park bench, aged and forgotten while his former student had conquered the world. Teodoro had never asked for recognition, never sought credit for his role in shaping a future champion. He had simply done what he believed was right, nurturing talent wherever he found it. Tears began to stream down Manny's face as he looked at his old trainer, seeing both the proud mentor from his youth and the elderly man who had watched his success from afar. The weight of all those years of separation, of missed opportunities to say thank you, of taking for granted the sacrifices that others had made for his benefit, crashed down on him with overwhelming force. Teodoro reached into his pocket and pulled out a faded photograph, a picture of young Manny in his first real boxing shorts, standing next to his trainer after winning a local amateur tournament. The image was creased and yellowed with age, but Teodoro had carried it with him all these years, a treasured reminder of the boy who had become a legend. The photograph trembled in Teodoro's weathered hands as he held it between them, the faded image serving as a portal to a time when dreams were just beginning to take shape. Manny stared at the picture through his tears, seeing himself as he had been nearly 4 decades ago, a skinny boy with oversized gloves, standing proudly next to the man who had believed in him when no one else would. The young Manny in the photograph looked impossibly small and vulnerable, his shorts hanging loose on his thin frame, his smile wide and innocent despite the bruises that marked his face from countless training sessions. But it was the expression in his eyes that struck Manny most powerfully, the fierce determination and unshakable hope that had carried him through those early years of struggle. Beside him in the photograph stood Teodoro, decades younger, but with the same kind eyes and gentle demeanor. His hand rested protectively on young Manny's shoulder, a gesture that spoke of pride, guidance, and unconditional support. The makeshift gym was visible in the background, with its concrete floors and improvised equipment that had somehow produced a future world champion. Manny's heart ached as he realized how much his old trainer had aged. The strong, confident man from the photograph had given way to someone more fragile, though the essential kindness in his eyes remained unchanged. Time had carved deep lines into Teodoro's face, and his once powerful frame had become stooped with age, but his spirit seemed as vibrant as ever. As the boxing legend found himself transported back to that pivotal moment, captured in the photograph, it had been his first real victory, a local tournament that had earned him a small trophy and, more importantly, the validation that he might actually have what it took to succeed. Teodoro had been more excited than Manny himself, treating the young fighter to a rare meal at a local eatery and talking animatedly about the potential he saw in his protégé. That night, Teodoro had sat Manny down and explained the long road ahead. He had spoken honestly about the sacrifices required, the dedication needed, and the countless hours of training that would be necessary to transform raw talent into refined skill. But he had also painted a picture of what was possible: championships, recognition, and the chance to lift his family out of poverty through the sport he loved. Manny remembered how Teodoro had worked multiple jobs to keep the small gym running, often using his own meager earnings to buy equipment or pay for Manny's tournament entry fees. The old trainer had never asked for anything in return, content to watch his student grow stronger and more skilled with each passing day. His only reward had been the satisfaction of seeing potential fulfilled and dreams gradually becoming reality. The guilt that had been building in Manny's chest intensified as he thought about all the years that had passed without contact. While he had been traveling the world, fighting in grand arenas and earning millions of dollars, Teodoro had remained in General Santos City, continuing to train young fighters with the same patience and dedication he had shown to Manny. Looking at the photograph, Manny could almost hear the sounds of that old gym, the rhythmic pounding of gloves against heavy bags, the squeak of worn boxing shoes on concrete, the encouraging shouts of Teodoro as he pushed his fighters to reach their potential. It had been a place of hope and transformation, where boys from the streets could dare to dream of something greater. The morning sun had climbed higher in the sky, casting new shadows across the park bench where the two men sat in profound silence. Around them, life continued its normal rhythm, but for Manny and Teodoro, time seemed suspended in this moment of recognition and remembrance. Manny's tears fell freely now, as he studied every detail of the photograph, each crease and faded edge telling the story of a man who had treasured this single moment for decades. The weight of his oversight pressed down on him like a physical burden, making it difficult to breathe as he contemplated the magnitude of what Teodoro had meant to his journey, and how completely he had disappeared from Manny's life. The old trainer carefully tucked the photograph back into his shirt pocket, the gesture so tender and protective that it broke Manny's heart even further. This wasn't just a picture to Teodoro. It was proof that he had once mattered, that he had played a crucial role in shaping one of the greatest boxers who ever lived. Yet he had carried this evidence in solitude, never seeking recognition or credit for his contributions. Manny's mind wandered to all the interviews he had given over the years, the countless times reporters had asked about his early influences and training. He had mentioned famous coaches, celebrated mentors, and well-known figures who had guided his professional career. But somehow, in all those recollections, Teodoro's name had never crossed his lips. The man who had taught him his first proper jab, who had shown him how to move his feet, who had instilled in him the discipline that would carry him through thousands of training sessions, had been erased from the official narrative of his success. The realization struck Manny that success had a way of rewriting history, elevating certain relationships while allowing others to fade into obscurity. As his career had progressed, and he had worked with increasingly prominent trainers, the humble beginnings in that makeshift gym had seemed less relevant to his story. The media wanted to hear about famous coaches and high-profile training camps, not about an unknown man who had worked with a poor kid in a concrete room with improvised equipment. But sitting here now, Manny understood that Teodoro's contribution had been perhaps the most important of all. Those early lessons had formed the foundation upon which everything else was built. The footwork, the basic combinations, the mental toughness, the work ethic, all of it could be traced back to those formative months and years under Teodoro's patient guidance. The elderly trainer sat quietly beside him, his presence both comforting and heartbreaking. There was no accusation in his demeanor, no bitterness about being forgotten. Instead, there was only the quiet dignity of a man who had done his job well and found satisfaction in seeing his students succeed, even if that success had carried Manny far beyond his reach. Manny thought about his own children, Jimuel, Michael, Princess, Queen Elizabeth, and Israel, and how he tried to teach them the importance of gratitude and remembering those who had helped them along the way. Yet here he was, confronted with his own failure to live up to those values. The irony was not lost on him, that he had become so focused on being a role model for others that he had forgotten to honor the role models from his own past. The park around them continued its morning rhythm, but Manny felt as though he and Teodoro existed in a bubble separate from the rest of the world. This moment felt sacred, a reckoning that had been decades in the making. The successful boxer, politician, and global icon was reduced to his essential self, a man confronting the debt he owed to someone who had asked for nothing in return. The silence between them grew heavy with unspoken emotions, as Manny struggled to find a way to express the overwhelming gratitude and regret that flooded his heart. Every breath felt labored as he grappled with the realization that this gentle man beside him had shaped the very foundation of his legendary career, yet had received nothing in return, not even acknowledgement or a simple thank you. Teodoro seemed to sense Manny's internal struggle and reached over to place a weathered hand on his former student's shoulder. The touch was gentle but firm, carrying the same reassuring quality it had possessed all those years ago when a frightened boy needed encouragement before stepping into the ring. The gesture spoke of forgiveness, understanding, and unconditional love that transcended time and circumstance. Manny's thoughts drifted to his mother, Dionysia, and how she had always emphasized the importance of remembering those who had helped them during their darkest days. She had instilled in him the value of gratitude and the responsibility that came with success. Yet somehow, in the whirlwind of his rise to fame, he had allowed these fundamental lessons to slip away, buried beneath the demands of a career that had consumed his entire existence. The boxing champion found himself remembering specific moments from his training with Teodoro, the way his mentor would demonstrate proper breathing techniques, the patience he showed when Manny struggled to master basic combinations, the encouraging nods when his young student finally executed a move correctly. These memories had been stored away in the deepest recesses of his mind, overshadowed by more recent achievements and relationships. Teodoro's presence brought back the smell of that old gym, a mixture of sweat, worn leather, and the concrete dust that seemed to permeate everything. Manny could almost hear the sound of his own young voice asking endless questions about technique, strategy, and the mental aspects of boxing. Teodoro had answered every inquiry with infinite patience, treating each question as important and worthy of a thoughtful response. The old trainer had never married, Manny suddenly remembered. He had dedicated his entire life to the gym and to the young fighters who passed through its doors. Boxing had been his calling, his purpose, and his legacy. Yet, as the sport evolved and moved toward more modern facilities and sophisticated training methods, men like Teodoro had been left behind, their contributions forgotten in the rush toward progress. Manny thought about the luxurious training facilities he had access to now, with their state-of-the-art equipment, professional staff, and every conceivable amenity. The contrast with Teodoro's humble gym was stark, yet those early lessons learned on concrete floors with makeshift equipment had proven more valuable than anything money could buy. The character, discipline, and fundamental skills developed under Teodoro's guidance had remained with Manny throughout his entire career. The realization that Teodoro had probably followed his career from afar, watching his fights on television or reading about his victories in newspapers, added another layer to Manny's emotional turmoil. His old trainer had witnessed every triumph, every championship, every moment of glory, yet had remained invisible in the background, never seeking credit or recognition for his role in making it all possible. As the morning sun climbed higher, casting shifting patterns of light and shadow across the park bench, Manny felt the full weight of his oversight settling upon him. This wasn't just about a forgotten relationship. It was about the fundamental values that had shaped him as a person and how success had gradually eroded his connection to those values. Manny wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, but the tears continued to flow as he contemplated the profound impact of this unexpected encounter. The weight of his neglect felt crushing, made worse by Teodoro's gentle acceptance and complete lack of resentment. Here was a man who had every right to feel bitter about being forgotten, yet he radiated nothing but warmth and genuine happiness at seeing his former student again. The boxing legend's mind began to race through all the opportunities he had missed over the years to reach out, to remember, to show gratitude. There had been countless interviews where he could have mentioned Teodoro's name, numerous charity events where he could have honored his first trainer, and dozens of trips back to General Santos City where he could have sought out the man who had started it all. Instead, Manny had become increasingly insulated by success, surrounded by managers, promoters, and handlers who focused only on the present and future, never encouraging him to look back at his roots. The machinery of fame had a way of severing connections to the past, treating earlier relationships as irrelevant to current achievements. But sitting here with Teodoro, Manny understood that those early connections were actually the most important of all. He thought about his wife Jinky and how she often reminded him to stay grounded, to remember where he came from and who had helped him along the way. She had grown up in similar circumstances and understood the importance of maintaining connections to their humble beginnings. Yet even she didn't know about Teodoro. because Manny had never shared those earliest memories with anyone. Perhaps because they reminded him of a time when success seemed impossible. The old trainer shifted slightly on the bench, his movements careful and deliberate in the way of someone whose body had been worn down by decades of hard work. Manny noticed the calluses on Teodoro's hands, still visible after all these years, permanent reminders of countless hours spent holding focus mitts, adjusting heavy bags, and demonstrating techniques to eager young fighters. Those hands had guided Manny's first attempts at proper punching form, had steadied him when he lost his balance during footwork drills, and had patted his back encouragingly after difficult training sessions. They were working hands, honest hands, hands that had never sought anything more than the satisfaction of helping others achieve their potential. Manny's thoughts turned to his own children, and the lessons he tried to teach them about humility, gratitude, and remembering their roots. He had always emphasized the importance of treating everyone with respect, regardless of their station in life. Yet here he was, confronted with his own failure to live up to these principles when it came to someone who had been instrumental in his development. The irony was particularly painful because Manny had built much of his public persona around being a man of the people, someone who never forgot where he came from. He had established foundations, funded scholarships, and helped countless individuals in need. But somehow, in all his charitable work and community outreach, he had overlooked the one person who had perhaps deserved his gratitude most of all. Teodoro reached into his other pocket and pulled out a small, worn notebook. The pages were yellowed with age and filled with handwritten notes in faded ink. Manny recognized it immediately. It was the training log Teodoro had kept during their time together, documenting every session, every improvement, every small victory in his young student's development. The sight of the notebook unleashed a fresh wave of emotion in Manny. This man had not only trained him, but had carefully documented their journey together, treating each session as important enough to record for posterity. While Manny had moved on to bigger things and forgotten about those early days, Teodoro had preserved every detail, creating a historical record of the foundation upon which a champion was built. Teodoro opened the weathered notebook with reverent care, his fingers tracing the edges of pages that had yellowed with time and countless handlings. Each page contained meticulous entries written in his careful script, documenting the progression of a skinny 12-year-old boy who would eventually become one of boxing's greatest legends. The sight of his own name written repeatedly throughout those pages sent fresh waves of emotion coursing through Manny's already overwhelmed heart. The entries were remarkably detailed, recording not just physical improvements, but emotional and mental developments as well. Teodoro had noted when young Manny first successfully executed a proper left hook, when he finally mastered the footwork that would become his signature style, and when his confidence began to grow from tentative uncertainty to genuine self-belief. Every small milestone had been considered worthy of documentation by this dedicated trainer, who understood that champions were built through countless incremental improvements. Manny could see entries that read like a father's proud observations of his son's growth. Teodoro had recorded the day Manny first sparred with an older, more experienced fighter and held his own. He had documented the morning when his young student arrived early, eager to begin training before anyone else had even awakened. There were notes about Manny's determination to continue practicing even when his hands were swollen and his body ached from previous sessions. The notebook revealed the depth of Teodoro's investment in his student's development. Beyond the technical aspects of boxing, he had recorded observations about Manny's character, his work ethic, and his potential for greatness. These weren't just training notes, they were the chronicles of a mentor who had recognized something special and had committed himself completely to nurturing that potential. As Teodoro slowly turned the pages, Manny glimpsed entries that brought back vivid memories of specific training sessions. He remembered the day Teodoro had written about his improved hand speed, the result of weeks of dedicated practice with a speed bag made from an old basketball. He recalled the session where his trainer had noted his growing ability to read opponents, a skill that would later become one of his greatest advantages in professional competition. The notebook also contained sketches, simple drawings that illustrated proper stance, punch angles, and defensive positions. Teodoro had created these visual aids specifically for Manny, understanding that his young student learned better when concepts were presented both verbally and visually. The care and thought that had gone into these illustrations spoke to a level of dedication that went far beyond what any trainer was obligated to provide. Manny noticed that many of the later entries contained predictions about his future potential. Teodoro had written about his belief that Manny could become a professional fighter, could win championships, could achieve things that seemed impossible for a boy from their circumstances. These weren't just hopeful wishes. They were informed assessments from someone who understood boxing at its deepest level and could recognize true talent when he saw it. The emotional impact of seeing his journey documented so thoroughly was overwhelming. While Manny had lived through these experiences, seeing them recorded from Teodoro's perspective gave them new meaning and significance. His trainer had been not just a teacher, but a historian, preserving the story of a champion's earliest development for reasons that were now becoming clear. Near the end of the notebook, Manny saw entries that documented his departure for Manila and bigger opportunities. Teodoro had written about his pride in seeing his student move on to the next level, but there were also subtle hints of sadness at losing someone who had become like family to him. The final entry was a simple statement expressing his confidence that Manny would achieve greatness and his hope that success would never change the good heart he had observed during their time together. The notebook represented more than just training records. It was a testament to the profound bond between mentor and student, a relationship that had shaped both their lives in ways that neither had fully understood at the time. For Teodoro, it had been his greatest achievement as a trainer. For Manny, it had been the foundation upon which everything else was built. As Teodoro gently closed the notebook and returned it to his pocket, Manny felt a profound transformation occurring within himself. The weight of recognition, guilt, and overwhelming gratitude had crystallized into something more powerful, a deep understanding of what truly mattered, and a commitment to honor the relationships that had shaped his journey. The tears that had been flowing freely throughout their encounter now carried a different quality, shifting from sorrow and regret to determination and renewed purpose. Manny reached into his own pocket and pulled out his phone, his fingers trembling slightly as he scrolled through his contacts. He found the number for his assistant and began typing a message, his thumbs moving with urgent precision. He was arranging for Teodoro to be brought to his home, where he could meet Jinky and the children, where they could sit together properly and begin the process of rebuilding a connection that should never have been severed. The boxing legend's mind was already racing with plans to honor his forgotten mentor. He would ensure that Teodoro's name was included in every future interview, every biography, every documentary about his career. The old gym where it all began would be restored and turned into a training facility for underprivileged youth, with Teodoro's name prominently displayed as its founding inspiration. The man who had been erased from history would finally receive the recognition he deserved. But beyond the public acknowledgements and grand gestures, Manny understood that the most important thing was simply this: being present, showing up, and ensuring that Teodoro knew he was valued and remembered. The elderly trainer had spent decades carrying that photograph and notebook, not because he sought fame or credit, but because they represented a connection to something meaningful in his life. Now Manny would make sure that connection was restored and strengthened. As they sat together on the park bench, Manny felt the healing power of this unexpected reunion washing over him. The guilt and regret would always remain as reminders of the importance of gratitude and remembrance, but they were now balanced by the opportunity to make things right. Teodoro's gentle acceptance and continued love had shown him that it was never too late to honor those who had helped shape his destiny. The morning sun had climbed high overhead, casting shorter shadows across the park as life continued its normal rhythm around them. Children played on nearby swings, while their parents watched protectively. Elderly couples walked hand in hand along the pathways, and vendors called out their wares to passing customers. But for Manny and Teodoro, this ordinary park bench had become the site of an extraordinary reconciliation. Manny thought about the story he would tell his children that evening, not about his latest business venture or political initiative, but about the importance of remembering those who had believed in them when no one else would. He would show them the photograph and explain how success meant nothing if it came at the cost of forgetting the people who had made it possible. The encounter had reminded Manny of fundamental truths that fame and fortune had obscured. True greatness wasn't measured only by championships won or money earned, but by the relationships maintained and the gratitude shown to those who had contributed to the journey. Teodoro had given him far more than boxing skills. He had provided the foundation of character and determination that had carried him through every challenge. As they finally rose from the bench together, Manny felt a sense of completion that had been missing from his life for decades. The circle that had been broken by time and circumstance was finally being restored. Teodoro would no longer be a forgotten figure from his past, but an honored part of his present and future. The old trainer's eyes sparkled with joy as they walked slowly toward the park entrance, where Manny's driver was already waiting to take them both home. The photograph and notebook would soon be joined by new memories, new conversations, and the knowledge that sometimes the most important victories happen not in boxing rings, but on simple park benches where the past and present finally find their way back to each other.